So it's finally time for my Xenoblade 3 predictions. Be prepared though, there are going to be some rather out there and wacky predictions within this video, covering topics like what the Ourboros symbol means, and who Mio actually is. So get strapped in as we start off with how the two worlds first merged together. So I think that the world of Ourboros merged with the world of Xenoblade 1, as Shulk was recreating that world. We know thanks to the end of Xenoblade 2 that the events of both previous games happened roughly at the same point in time. And so during Shulk's recreation of Xenoblade 1's world, Azerda and the other Titans passed through a rift which took them to this universe that Shulk was in the process of creating. Now we can assume that this rift that Azerda and the Titans crossed is similar to the one that we see in Future Connected, and that allowed the party and everybody to pass through unharmed into this new universe. And the reason that I think everybody went through okay and wasn't in a foggy state after crossing the rift was because it was Klaus who allowed the people of Ourboros to pass through unharmed. We see Klaus spinning his hand and offering one final gift to the people of Ourboros, and I believe this is what he was referring to, providing them with a safe form of transportation to a safe land where the remaining people of Ourboros can live happily and in peace. Of course, both sides of this would have likely been oblivious of each other, keeping in mind that likely many earthquakes and tremors would occur from the Titans crashing into this landmass at roughly the same time the Bionis was collapsing. So chances are that both sides didn't actually notice that anything was out of the ordinary, to start off with at least. And that's how the worlds came together. But how did the party come together? Well, I think that this game will be played from a very similar perspective to Torna. No, not that one. The terrorist organisation in Xenoblade 2. Considering that the party is made up of a mix of Agnes and Keves soldiers, and those two nations are supposed to be at war right now, I think that our group of heroes will band together to put a stop to the war and the pointless bloodshed under the name of Ourboros. Now, there is going to be more relevance and importance in that name, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in this video. For these two groups to unite, however, they will likely have to turn their backs on their home and the nations that they once came from, and this is what will lead them to being referred to as a terrorist organisation by both nations, and this will likely all be instigated by this man, Vandam. You see, during this clip, both the Keves and Agnes sides appear not to be fighting anymore, as the three Keves members seem completely uninterested in Mio in this particular scene, where just prior she appeared to be dodging bullets from something or someone, and this will likely have been Vandam, who may be the leader of the Ouroboros group. Their goal will likely be to interfere with conflicts across this world between the two nations, to stop the fighting and put an end to the real enemy's plans. Now, before we touch on the real enemy and what their goals and objectives for this world would be, I first need to explain how Ourboros will play into the story. The Ouroboros symbol represents reincarnation and originated from both Egyptian and Greek mythology. So I believe that this new world will work on a cycle of reincarnation thanks to the conduit. When a person dies, their soul is sent off to a whole new world through the power of the conduit, which we know is a gateway to different universes. And when the souls enter this new universe, they become someone else entirely. And this will be how this new world functions, and it will explain a few of the weird things that we saw in the trailer, such as this guy who looks very similar to Shulk and Klaus, but likely isn't either of those two, and how the previously mentioned Vandam happens to have the exact same scar on his forehead as the Xenoblade 2 version. These two characters may simply be reincarnations of those previous characters that we've met, and I would hazard a guess that we'll see a lot of other characters which appear to be reincarnations of people that we've previously previously known through the other games. And this is how the life aspect of the game would work, as it could be argued that reincarnation allows for infinite life. But I also think that it may be possible for a soul to reject this process, and that this is how the Fog King and the Fog Beasts are created. Now, before we go any further, I just want to say that a lot of what I'm about to mention is very similar to Xenosaga, a game series that I haven't played. This part of my theory was thus inspired by a Nelzone theory, so I recommend checking out his predictions video after this one if you want more clarity on the Fog King and the Gnosis from Xenosaga. To sum it up as well as possible though, in Xenosaga, when a human dies, their consciousness is absorbed into something known as the collective unconscious. But if a person rejects this process, then they are transformed and become a Gnosis. And I believe the same concept applies here, but instead of joining the network, it's simply being reincarnated. And in this way, the Fog King will be very similar actually to ghosts. And as we can see from the trailer, the world seems to slowly be filling up with more and more fog, as likely fallen soldiers reject the cycle and transform into fog creatures. This is where Offseers come in, however, as they likely have the ability to either cleanse or force a soul into the cycle of Ourboros and reincarnate, thus preventing them from adding to the existing fog, and attempting to prevent these fog creatures from overwhelming and taking over the world of Ionios. Although Noah and Mio are likely not aware of this truth themselves. But I also previously mentioned that I thought the fog was being used as a tool by the main antagonist of the game, which I believe will be Galea. Now, Galea is likely already dead, however she also probably has rejected the process of Ourboros and refuses to reincarnate. And of course, normally this would result in her turning into a fog monster. But because of her connection to Mayneth, in the same way that Klaus was connected to Zanza, I believe she may be immune from this process. And because of this, she likely seeks to destroy this world and the whole system and process of Ourboros. Now, she simply might just want to do this for selfish reasons, such as just not wanting to die and be forgotten about. However, she may have a different reason which has a slightly nicer undertone to it. I think that Galea and Klaus loved each other, and Galea refuses to reincarnate and move on, as that would mean forgetting all of her feelings for Klaus, which she likely never got the chance to confess due to Klaus's experiment. And this would be a similar throwback to the concept of Jin from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, who became a flesh eater and gave up his immortality just so that he would remember Laura. And because of that, Galea might finally be able to come to terms with this after Mio or a different blade shares in her grief, and hopefully will be treated to a very nice scene where Noah and Mio play their flutes, setting both Galea and Klaus's souls to rest, where we see them both ascending towards the conduit, for a nice and happy ending for their story at least. To achieve this goal, however, and being able to finally defeat Galea and put an end to her production of the fog, I think that as both the Keves and Agnes nations are gonna need to team up. However, it's likely going to take some convincing to stop this war, and that's why I think the party will go to Melia and the Keves nation first and attempt to talk her out of her attack on the Agnes nation. And to do so, we're going to need to do something pretty important for Melia, and my guess is that it's going to be to cure the remaining Telethia in this world. I've already mentioned this previously on the channel, but to go more in depth, we'll likely have to meet with Thielen once again and help him finish and conclude his research, which will allow all of the remaining Telethia to be brought back as high end tier. And doing this would likely be more than enough to appease Melia and have her join our side in trying to stop the war and prevent the fog from growing even more, as I imagine that she'd be eternally grateful to see her brethren back to normal once again, and we'd likely continue on from this point of the game with her full support, which would just leave convincing Nia, which I think might be a little bit harder. And chances are, to convince Nia to stop her attack on the Keves nation, we're gonna need a lot of help from Mio. I believe that Mio is in one way related to Nia, and there are a couple of ways that Monolith could go about this. A possibility is that Mio is Nia's daughter. However, I don't think this will be the case, as there is no evidence to support that blades can have children, and I don't think consuming human flesh would make any difference either. Alternatively, Mio could be Nia's blade. We know from Xenoblade 2 and Torna that sometimes a driver's qualities can shine very brightly within a blade, as demonstrated by Laura and Hayes, who are practically identical. And yes, Mio and Nia aren't exactly the same, but there are a lot of strong similarities. But my personal prediction is that Mio will actually be Nia's sister. Now, I'm well aware that sounds crazy, considering that Nia's sister was supposed to have died back in Xenoblade 2. However, there's one line from that game that makes me think that it is possible, which is, she lives on inside you. We should all know how much Takahashi loves to use foreshadowing, and this scene in Xenoblade 2 could have been foreshadowing to the fact that she will return in Xenoblade 3 as Mio. And this could explain a few things, such as how Mio, who appears to be a blade at the moment, has an age of 19, as like I've previously mentioned, ages for blades are kind of pointless. And it could also explain why Mio's core crystal is almost identical to Nia's, something that's supposed to be unique amongst blades. And for all you skeptics about this theory, I'm well aware of how far-fetched this is, but I definitely think Mio is related to Nia, and to me, this was the way that made the most sense, and would fit in best with the game's style of Ourboros and the concept of life. But out of all of the theories that I'm going to talk about within this video, this is by far the one I'm the least confident on. Anyways, getting back on topic, what about other returning characters? Now, I've made a full video of which characters are likely to still be alive or dead in this game, and that video basically sums up the possibility of who could be around. But in my personal opinion, I think there will be very few returning characters, and they would be Zeke, Poppy, Pyra and Mithra, Alvis, and Kino. Of course, there would be other returning side characters, such as Tyrea and Dromark, who are likely to be at Melee and Nia's sides, but for the main cast, that's it. The reason I've chose Kino as well is I think that he will be a very grumpy Grampy-pon within this game, and he will tell stories of his adopted father, the hero-pon Ricky, and I think that some of his kids, or maybe other Noppon that he tells his story to, will create a little sword in a side quest and will call it the Sword of Legendariness, which would of course be a nod to Xenoblade X. And you may have noticed throughout this video that I've made a couple of nods towards Xenoblade X, because I still believe that the planet of Ionios will become Mira. Now, I have talked about this in a separate video altogether, where I also looked at some evidence to suggest that this theory was true, but to summarise it quickly for this one, I think that after the events of the final boss and at the end of the game, the Agnes and Keves nations will unite together and form a new nation known as Samar, and these will henceforth be known as the Samarians, which are of course an intergalactic federation within the Xenoblade X universe. Now, you can help me with this theory as well if you speak another language. Both the Keves and Agnes nations mean lamb in both Latin and Hebrew, and Samar, or something similar, may mean sheep in a different language, which would bring this full circle and signify those two nations uniting together. They would likely abandon the planet, however, as the fog output may have been too much and forced them to have to leave their new home, but they may have left a few people behind to carry on cleansing the fog to hopefully make Ionios and Mira one day inhabitable again, and one of these Offseers that was left over to finish cleansing the planet may be the Black Knight. And that pretty much wraps up my predictions for Xenoblade 3. I do want to mention, however, that there are certain things that I am still unsure about, and things that don't really fit in with my theory, such as the clocks that were constantly mentioned in the trailer, and the symbol which appears to be on every person, which, might I add, appears to change dependent on the person, as we can see from Shulk's lookalike, where his is slightly more filled in and more redder than the other ones that we've seen. The wounded Uriah Titan and the broken mechanical harness sword is also something else I can't explain. Perhaps Galea manipulated them in some way to position them together? Honestly, there are so many things that we don't have details about yet, so there are going to still be a lot of holes in this theory. So I'm going to keep an eye on these things in future trailers to see if it debunks my theory in the future. But with that said, I appreciate each and every one of you that has made it this far into the video. But before this video ends, I just want to let you know that YouTube tells me that 94% of you who are watching my videos currently aren't subscribed. It would mean the world to me and would help me out a ton if you are part of that 94% and would click that red button and be one of the many people that helped me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. We're so close, I can almost taste it. So smash the subscribe button, and whilst you're down there, click the like one as well. But once again, I appreciate you all for watching and hope you've enjoyed this video. And until the next one, guys, peace.